IDP Plus Advice Show. Today we're going to look at Week 12 snap counts for IDP, defensive player alignments, injuries, resulting waiver claims, etc. So I am your host, Ricky Rodriguez. You can find me at RickyRod66. Unfortunately, my co-host, Shawn Teague, who you can find on X at Shawn8386, Shawn has some sporting events related to his children, so he can't join us today. He'll be here on Sunday for the Start Sit show, and hopefully he'll be able to join us next week as well. Thrilled to be with you here on Tuesday, November 25th. Sorry about that. To recap Week 12 and share some thoughts on Week 13 and beyond. Now, many of you know I took a trip to watch LSU football this weekend. As a result, I was behind in terms of watching games, doing research on stats, and so I won't be able to have waivers at the end of this show as I have the past couple of weeks. I've got a better attitude about it. I just ran out of time. So my apologies, but we'll plan to do that next week. As always, you can leave your questions on YouTube, on this very channel, on this station, on this show. And Shawn and I will be periodically looking at and responding to those comments, questions, etc. Appreciate it if you give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. All right, let's jump in and let's go ahead and start with the Buffalo Bills, who only played 59 snaps against Houston. As a reminder for those that are new, the average number of defensive snaps per game is 65. So when you hear 59, that means they play less snaps. And you hear some that were much less than this as the show goes on. And when it's less than the average, that means it has an impact to IDP stats oftentimes. But let's start with the edge, where Greg Rousseau played 75% of the snaps. Joey Bosa played 66% of the snaps. Neither one had a sack in this game or in the last three games for that matter. Now, Rousseau at least came through with 6 tackles, even though he didn't have any sacks. Bosa only gave you 2 quarterback hits. TJ Sanders continued to be the 4th edge player behind AJ Epinesa as well. TJ Sanders, who's primarily meant to be a defensive tackle, has been playing mostly on the edge. The Bills did re-sign Shaq Lawson today, who is now on his 3rd stint with the Bills, so he'll probably move into that 4th edge role once he gets up to speed. And they signed him to the practice squad today, by the way. Terrell Bernard, of course, he has a great game last week, gives us 11 tackles. You knew it couldn't last, folks. After the 66% of the snaps he played this week, thanks to friendly fire from his own teammate Matt Milano, he was injured. This is considered week to week. He may even get put on IR as well. So Terrell Bernard is going to not be playing at least for the next 2 weeks. Shaq Thompson stepped in, wore the green dot at 58% of the snaps that he played, and it's expected that Shaq Thompson will continue in that role. So Shaq Thompson is someone you can check out from a waiver wire perspective. So while I won't have them ranked at the end of the show, as I mentioned, that's an example where I will be calling out players to be on the lookout for as we go through these different teams. Matt Milano was all the way down to 53%. Dorian Williams in his 3rd linebacker role was in that 32% range where he typically has been. Teron Johnson, 2nd game in a row that he's healthy and played 63% of the snaps and continues to be the slot corner for the Bills. Max Hairston played 49% of the snaps before he left with an injury. We weren't playing him anyway because he was still rotating with Tre'Davious White, but just as an FYI. Now, good news at the safety position is Cole Bishop played 100% of the snaps and only played 34% deep. He had been in that roughly 45 to 55% range. He tied for the team lead, but it was only with 6 tackles. Once again, only 59 snaps were played by the Bills defense. Jordan Poyer continues to start at the safety position next to Cole Bishop, but Poyer, once again, does not play 100% of the snaps. He played 80%, continues to rotate with Jordan Hancock. When Jordan Hancock is in, he plays almost primarily deep. So in his 20% of the snaps, he played 92% deep, whereas Poyer only played 19% of the snaps deep. And Poyer did tie for the team lead with tackles. So that is your Buffalo Bills story. And let's go ahead and move to the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins had a bye in Week 12. Not a whole lot to talk about there. We'll be watching things like Chop Robinson. We'll be glad, and how much his playing time increases. We'll be looking to see if Jordan Brooks and Terrell Dodson can continue what they've been doing, which we certainly expect them to. And we'll be watching to see what happens at the safety position next to Minka Fitzpatrick. But I wouldn't be starting Ashton Davis or Melifonwu or Dante Trader this coming week. With that, let's move to the Patriots here. The Patriots played 64 snaps against the Bengals. Robert Spillane played his typical 100% of the snaps, but only had 5 tackles. Christian Ellis returned, played 45% of the snaps, only had 5 tackles. Jack Gibbons kind of alternated with Christian Ellis as they had been before Ellis's injury. Gibbons finished with 3 tackles on 32% of snaps. Morte Mapu didn't play any snaps on defense this week. Jelani Tavai was inactive with injury. K'Lavon Chaisson and Harold Landry both played in that early 70% range of snaps. Harold Landry did get a sack for you. I was expecting Chaisson to get one as well. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Chaisson is pretty much sack or bust. But what I will tell you is that I did some research prior to the show, and one of the things I noticed is that K'Lavon Chaisson's pass rushing grades, pass rush win rate, etc., on PFF, and shout out to PFF, is actually better than Harold Landry right now. Harold Landry is actually pretty far down the list. I didn't record the exact numbers. Sorry about that. So if I'm betting for the rest of the year, it's actually Chaisson, not Landry. But Chaisson is sack or bust for the most part. Milton Williams was placed on IR. Christian Barmore played 81% of the snaps in the previous game when Milton Williams got hurt because of lack of depth. This week, he was down to 72%, but at 72%, you would have expected a better line or hope for a better line than what he gave us. Unfortunately, he did not give us what we were hoping for. Jalen Hawkins and Craig Woodson both played 100% of the snaps at safety. Hawkins played 67% deep. Woodson played 70% deep after Woodson only played 41% deep the previous week. We've talked about it before, but they continue to alternate who's more deep than not, or sometimes both are deep, etc. It's really matchup based. It's hard to rely on those two when they're playing that much deep oftentimes. As a reminder, the Patriots are on bye in week 14. Okay, let's move to the New York Jets, who played 63 snaps versus the Ravens. Jermaine Johnson's snap count was all the way up to 89%. Will McDonald was up to 70%, or up at 70%. Once again, just like last week, he did not have 4 sacks as he had a couple of games ago. McDonald, as I talked about last week, we talked about, Shawn was here last week, was truly boom or bust. He had no stats recorded. I double-checked going down the Jet stats just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't think I did, but he was a total bust, was Will McDonald. At linebacker, Jamian Sherwood played 100% of the snaps, had 13 tackles. Quincy Williams, 100% as well. So all that noise about, Quincy Williams being benched, and he was going to be, but then Mauagoa got hurt and blah, blah, blah. Well, that seems to be all behind us, except for the fact that one worry I have is while Sherwood had 13 tackles, Quincy Williams only had 6 tackles. So, does that mean that Quincy Williams could potentially go back to the bench? I'm not saying he is. In deeper leagues, I'm probably playing him for sure. But depending on what my other options are, I might consider it because I am worried about it a little bit. Not a lot, a little bit. Kiko Mauagoa continued as a third linebacker, 38%. Now, the reason I wanted to bring that up in particular was Marcelino McCrary-Ball was activated from IR, but even with that, Mauagoa played the number 3 linebacker role. I wouldn't be surprised, though, to see Marcelino McCrary-Ball leapfrog Mauagoa. It's a small possibility, but it could happen. So just keep that in mind, that particularly if you're in a really deep league, but hopefully no one's playing Mauagoa out there. But just in case you are, just keep that in mind. Azaria Thomas and Brandon Stevens are your 2 outside cornerbacks for the Jets. Now, in the slot is where it was a little bit interesting. Jarvis Brownlee had been sort of the number 3 cornerback. He only played 37% of the snaps, with 65% of that in the slot. I did not see any injury indications on Jarvis Brownlee. If there was, that could explain this. But Isaiah Oliver played 30% of the snaps, and he played 47% of those in the slot. Malachi Moore and Tony Adams also played about 20% of their snaps in the slot. So something happened there. If you're relying on Brownlee, I would not. Let's watch the injury reports as the week progresses. If you have a question about that, we'll certainly answer that in our Start Sit show, which, though, if you're not familiar, 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Time, Sunday mornings. Shawn and I are here to answer your Start Sit questions, both for IDP and for offense. And we have a little bit of fun with that as well, as a lot of our listeners and watchers will tell you. Okay, at the safety position, Tony Adams and Malachi Moore both played 100% of the snaps. Of course, remember, Andre Cisco went on IR several weeks ago. Adams played 41% deep after 50% the previous week. So improvement there. Malachi Moore only 37% deep, 36% the week before. So both of them are getting quite a bit of good alignment that we typically like from our safeties. Both of them finished with 6 tackles. So feeling a little bit better about Malachi Moore. As I've talked about before, he is no Brian Branch, but at least we're starting to see some tackles from that. I'm not rushing to put Moore in my lineup, or Adams for that matter, but with that kind of alignment and usage, if that were to continue through the year, it could be good. Now, the caveat is this was against the Ravens, as I mentioned earlier, and it was 63 snaps that I played against the Ravens, so almost an average amount. With the Ravens, with Lamar Jackson running capability, although he's injured very clearly, and Derrick Henry's running ability, maybe they were closer to the line because they really wanted to protect against the run game, and they really weren't worried about deep passing from the Ravens because of the way the Ravens passing game is. So this could be a one-week thing as an FYI. All right, let us go ahead and move to the Baltimore Ravens. Speaking of the Ravens, who played those Jets that we just talked about, the Ravens only played 59 snaps against the Jets. Draymond Jones, who was acquired for the Titans, had his highest snap count yet and actually led the edge defenders for the Ravens in terms of most snaps. He actually played 68%. Once again, that's the most he's played since he's joined the Ravens. He had 4 tackles and 1.5 sacks, which was fantastic to see. This was against the Jets. I probably could repeat that several times as we go through these Ravens stats, but keep this in mind. This was against the Jets. Mike Green played 64%. He got 5 tackles and a sack. Van Noy played 61%. Now, some of these edge rookies, such as Mike Green, are starting to hit their strides. This was week 12, which is almost basically a full college regular season. These guys are starting to move beyond the I'm a rookie and, not that they're a 6 or 7 year veteran, but they're starting to continue to learn, and we're starting to see improvement. So some of these rookies that we've maybe released, particularly in redraft leagues versus dynasty, or we've been just sitting on the bench hoping for some progress and improvement, we're starting to see that. And we'll talk about some of those others, like with the Falcons and the Giants, as we move through the show here. Travis Jones played 66% of the snaps, down a little bit from the last couple of weeks, but in defensive tackle required leagues, someone as a low end 2 defensive tackle, maybe high end 3 is someone you can consider. Roquan Smith basically played all the snaps and had 11 tackles leading the team. Teddy Buchanan was up to 76%. The previous 3 weeks, working from most recent to the furthest back, 68, 59, and 69%. Buchanan also had 8 tackles, but the reason I bring this up is Kyle Hamilton got hurt. I haven't had a chance to research, to be very transparent with you all, that once Hamilton went out the game after he played his 85% of the snaps, did that allow Buchanan to play more? Because, of course, Hamilton is playing so much closer to the line of scrimmage. Hamilton here on Tuesday, because of their game coming up earlier in the week, they're not playing on Sunday. They're playing in the Thanksgiving days here. So Hamilton was listed as limited today. He was DNP the day before on Monday. Harbaugh said he has a good chance of playing. If Hamilton plays, I expect Buchanan's percent. This is Ricky speculating here, but I expect his percent to come back down in terms of snap counts, and thus his tackles will probably come down a little bit as well. Well, speaking of Kyle Hamilton, he did have a nice 8% blitz rate. So one of the things I tried to do this week as part of my research is to share any defensive backs that I saw that blitzed 5% or more based on PFF stats. So I will try and call these out as we go through the show, because if they're blitzing and they're blitzing 5% or more of the time, gives them a chance for a sack or a bigger play or more tackles for loss, etc. At the safety position, another interesting thing that happened, talked about what might have been the impact of Buchanan. I do have to say might once again, but Aloy Gilman, while he played 100% of snaps, he only played 44% deep. My guess is they moved him closer to the line for some of the snaps as Hamilton left the game. Not all, but some. Malachi Starks played 66% deep. So it's going to be really interesting if Hamilton is out. How do they leverage these guys? And it could be that it goes back to where, when they weren't confident with the 3 safety look, and they only had 2 safeties with Starks and Hamilton before Gilman was acquired.
It's time for bed.
Hamilton wasn't playing nearly as much close to the line of scrimmage. He was playing a decent amount, but not nearly as much as we're seeing right now. So we could see Gilman in that Hamilton role. I'm not playing Gilman, but you could see that happen. Nate Wiggins and Marlon Humphrey, who returned from injury, played 100% of the snaps and were the 2 primary outside corners. Marlon Humphrey did move into the inside at 3 when they went to 3 cornerbacks, and Humphrey had a 6.8% blitz rate, one of the things that makes Marlon Humphrey attractive for us. Okay, that completes the Baltimore Ravens, and let's move on to the Cincinnati Bengals, who played 71 snaps, so they played more than average, versus the New England Patriots. This was probably their best game from a defensive perspective. Remember, one of the touchdowns the Patriots did get was through a pick 6 by Marcus Jones. So when you look at the number of points they typically give up, let's just call it 35 plus, 40 plus, whatever you want to call it, they played much better on defense this week. Except for their tight end coverage. If you have a tight end going against the Bengals defense, you play that tight end. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, Trey Hendrickson was out once again, and he's already been declared out for this coming week. Shamar Stewart was on IR. Cam Sample was out. Joseph Asai's snap count was up to 77%. Miles Murphy did come down from the previous week where he played 89% down to 75%, similar to the Milton Williams, Christian Barmore discussion I had earlier. He does have some volume-based opportunities. Didn't do as much as we hoped on the stat sheet this week, but Miles Murphy in your deeper leagues, he's getting a bunch of snaps. I'll just leave it at that. I would still prefer Osai over him. Osai had 6 tackles, if I remember correctly. I forgot to type that into my notes. B.J. Hill played 79% of the snaps at defensive tackle. Like to see him playing that much because he is their best defensive tackle. And instead of resting him and playing him 60%, let's get your best players on the field and make them work till they pass out. Barrett Carter, 100% after a lousy game last week, bounces back with 16 tackles, which was fantastic to see. He's had over 10 tackles in 4 of the last 6 games, if I'm remembering correctly. Demetrius Knight was back up to 85% after he was all the way down to 57%, and we were worried if Oren Burks had leapfrogged him for the number 2 linebacker position. Burks was clearly the number 3 at playing only 35% this week, and Knight did give us 8 tackles. At this point in time and where the season is, I'm still going to go back to the well with Carter as the number 1, Knight is the number 2, but we're still expecting Knight to only be in that, let's just call it in general, that 70% to 85% range on a week-to-week basis. Jordan Battle played 100% of the snaps. He only played 37% of the snaps deep, and he had 6 tackles. Geno Stone had a hell of a game on his 97% of the snaps. He only played 49% deep. So the percent deep that Geno Stone plays has continued to decrease, which is very interesting. And he had 13 tackles, which was only second on the team because Barrett Carter had 16. And he had a pick 6 to boot. So a fantastic game for Geno Stone. The thing with the Cincinnati to this point is the reason the safeties we felt were getting so many tackles was because the front 7 in front of them weren't doing a very good job. Well, if their defense improves, that might limit the opportunities, particularly for Jordan Battle, who has tended to play deep, and Stone who's tended to play deep, but Stone looks like he's creeping more and more to the line of scrimmage. Right now, I think I can play them both until I really get overconfident that the front seven has really improved. One interesting but disappointing thing that happened at the cornerback position: Cam Taylor-Britt went on IR. Josh Newton had previously been the number 4 cornerback who would have been moved to the number 3 cornerback role. And when he came on the field in 3 wide, Dax Hill would have moved to the slot. Well, this past week, Jalen Davis, who was basically a practice squad call-up, if I remember correctly, stepped into that number 3 cornerback role, playing 59% of the snaps. Jalen Davis, not Dax Hill, played the slot primarily. And Dax Hill only had 4 tackles. You see the correlation between outside versus slot when it comes to Dax Hill, or again, some of those, a lot of slot snaps for Dax Hill. Even when DJ Ivey came into the game as a 4th cornerback, Dax Hill was still primarily outside, and Ivey got those other snaps in the slot. Well, I'm having trouble with snaps in slot at this particular moment for some reason. So we're going to watch this for Dax Hill. We're not going to just quickly drop him, but it is a warning sign that we need to be watchful for, because we may need to move on to another cornerback. Y'all have heard Shawn say on here, particularly in redraft leagues, don't get married to your cornerbacks. Don't get married to your safeties. If they're not doing what you need, drop them and find another one. Not saying to do that quite yet on Dax because of that tackle floor he's been giving us, but we'll watch it for one more week. Let's move to the Cleveland Browns here. And for those that are wondering, I am recording the timestamps so that you can have the timestamps, as I've promised to try and do. So sometimes I have to pause a tidbit just to write those down. Okay, the Cleveland Browns played a whopping 79 snaps against the Raiders. That's almost 5 quarters, basically, is a way to think about it. A full game and almost one more quarter. They had 10 sacks against the Raiders. When I was putting this together, I was thinking it might be easier to list who didn't get a sack versus who did get a sack. So I'm not going to go through all the people that got sacks, but we will hit on some of these as we go through it. Don't expect a repeat of this for a lot of these players. For example, I'm not expecting Devin Bush to get a sack this coming week, okay? But what it does say is play your good defensive lineman against the Raiders. The defensive line sucks. And if the Raiders move away from Geno Smith, whether it be Kenny Pickett or Aiden O'Connell, it doesn't matter. It's going to be the same situation. All righty. Carson Schwarzenegger, 96% of the snaps, 11 tackles. And this is funny. They play, he gets a, quote, high ankle sprain. They go on a bye, expected to miss several weeks. He actually comes back and plays, and he comes back and he's had 3 games in a row where he's had 10-plus tackles. The dude is a beast, top 12 for IDP as we move forward at the linebacker position. Devin Bush was down to 76%, but as I mentioned, he did have a sack to go along with 9 tackles. And when you play 5 quarters, as I talked about earlier, there's going to be a lot of these stats that are pumped up. So I'm not expecting Devin Bush as well to have 9 tackles in the coming week. Expect a good 7, but not necessarily 9, okay? Myles Garrett, 5 tackles, 3 more sacks, 18 for the year, chasing that record of 22.5, which I expect him to get. The man is a beast. Alex Wright was still out with a quad injury, but he did get a nice 3-year contract. Shows how highly they're thinking of him. They didn't give him a minimum contract, folks. You can go look at the details if you want. But Alex Wright, nice 3-year contract. Isaiah McGuire played in his place, and I had to, have Alex Wright on my injured list on one league, which is very disappointing after seeing Isaiah McGuire get 7 tackles and a sack on 62% of the snaps. Cam Thomas also played a season-high 56% of the snaps. Mason Graham, 5 tackles and pass defense. Malik Collins, 3 tackles and 2.5 sacks. Did I mention to play your defensive lineman against the Raiders? The edge, interior, doesn't matter. Play them. Even though Chip Kelly was fired by the Raiders, play them, your defensive lineman against them. Miles Harden continues to be the slot cornerback as an FYI. Grant Delpit blitzed 5.1% of the time. He only had 6 tackles, though, 100% of the snaps. I told you last week, don't chase Ronnie Hickman. Shawn agreed with me. He played 100% of the snaps, but he played 79% deep, only had 5 tackles. So that is your Cleveland Browns story, folks. Let's move to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh Steelers had 65 snaps against the Bears. Alex Highsmith was out once again. He did practice on a limited basis last week. There are indications that he could be active this week, and if he is, we're putting Nick Herbig on our bench as a reminder. Now, Herbig actually didn't get a sack this week, which is surprising. Feels like whenever he plays that full-time role, he gets a sack. He played 92% of the snaps, got 2 tackles. Now, what saved him is he recovered a fumble for a touchdown in the end zone that TJ Watt did. TJ Watt had 5 tackles in that sack, which broke his brother's record, and it was kind of cool to listen to JJ broadcasting that game of his brother TJ breaking JJ's record. So TJ has more sacks than his brother JJ. And JJ even talked about the fact, well, if he's going to break my record, what a way to break it with a strip sack fumble in the end zone that results in a touchdown. Cam Hayward, 72%, only 2 tackles. Keanu Benton played a season high, 75% of the snaps, got 5 tackles. And remember, in these 65 snaps against the Bears that they played, 65 is right on par for average. Keanu Benton continues to improve. And boy, I really hope they take him off the nose next year and put him on the edge along with Derek Harmon. I talked about that previously. I'm going to state it again. I like him for the future. Cam Hayward retires and they put him into that Cam Hayward type of alignment. Patrick Queen did play 100% of the snaps and only had 5 tackles. Oh boy, your weekly public service announcement to not trust the number 2 linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We talked about that with the Houston Texans as well. And there are others, but that's such as the Raiders we'll talk about here in a little bit. Peyton Wilson was back down to 62%. So working from most current to recent, it's been 62%, 76%, 56%, 85% of the snaps. So it's like a freaking yo-yo. He only had 5 tackles this week, not quite as hyper efficient as he typically is. Cole Holcomb did not play any defensive snaps. Malik Harrison played 60% of the snaps in this game against the Bears. He only finished with 3 tackles, though. So if Peyton Wilson isn't going to get that hyper efficiency and not going to get the snap percentage we need, and with Harrison being all the way up to 60%, not to mention Holcomb being back and how he might play into this, I'm very, 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 did I mention very leery of playing Peyton Wilson this coming week. As safety, Kyle Duggar played a full-time role for the 4th week in a row, 6 tackles, which was second on the team. And good news, too, this week, he only played 51% deep after playing 73% the previous week. And I didn't record the previous week to that, but it was also very high in his first game with the Steelers. So that could be good news for Kyle Duggar. Jalen Ramsey was the other full-time safety playing 100% of the snaps. He got to play 100% because he didn't get ejected for throwing a punch this week. He played 66% deep, which you hate to see, but he did get 9 tackles to lead the team. And this was against the Bears, as I mentioned. So we do like it when cornerback eligible folks, are playing safety. Worried about how deep he's playing, but if he can get 9 tackles or 7 tackles, particularly if you have a bump in cornerback scoring, you can continue to play Jalen Ramsey. Joey Porter was in and out of the lineup with an injury that did not impact Jalen Ramsey's utilization. As a side note, Chuck Clark did not play any snaps. It was the Duggar and Ramsey show at safety. All right, let's move to the AFC South and talk about the Houston Texans here, folks. And the Houston Texans played 66 snaps versus the Bills. Speaking of public service announcements, as it just did with the Steelers, this week, E.J. Speed, who had played 78% of the snaps last week, played 47% this week. Henry To'oTo'o, who had played 49% of the snaps the week before, was at 77% this week. You could trust Azeez Al-Shaair, played 100% of the snaps once again. Each of the 3 linebackers finished with 7 tackles. To'oTo'o did get a sack, which helped boost his productivity, along with playing more snaps. Which one this coming week, I'm not sure. Is it because the Bills maybe play a little bit more two tight ends and have the tight ends running more routes, maybe. I don't know. It's pure speculation. I'm not sure what it is that is when his speed is on the field more versus To'o. Will Anderson, 6 tackles, 2.5 sacks. Danielle Hunter, 6 tackles, 2 sacks. Both had 3 quarterback hits. As I mentioned in the Buffalo section, I would have never guessed that between the two of them, they would have had 4.5 sacks, and that the Texans in general would have had as many sacks as they did against Josh Allen, who is extremely hard to sack. But Allen tried to be hero, Superman, held onto the ball, ran backwards, sideways, ran in circles, you name it kind of thing, creating those opportunities. As he even said in the post-game interview, he needed to let the ball go more earlier and not hold on and try to make these super plays. So Allen realizes what he did wrong, but he was clearly frustrated because of how good this Houston Texans defense is. Sheldon Rankins played 61% of the snaps. Jalen Petrie was out with a concussion, and he is still in the protocol. We'll be interested to see on Wednesday what the Wednesday practice report says. Now, the previous games, not this most recent one, the one before, with Petrie out, Kalen Bullock and Miles Bryant played 100% of the snaps, and Bryant basically moved into the slot when they went to 3 wide, and Jalen Mills came in and played the other position. Okay? So in the previous week, Miles Bryant played that Petrie role. He did not quite play that Petrie role this week. So Jalen Reed started and only played 26% deep, and he played like that, I'll call it that strong safety role that Jalen Petrie played. Miles Bryant, when he did play came in and played the slot. Reed was on the field most of the game, and he did get dinged up some, so he only played 83% of the snaps. But when he was feeling well, he was on the field 100% of the time, but he was in that strong safety role. And once again, Miles Bryant was the one that played the slot. So Bryant played 74% of the snaps with 76% of the slot. Jalen Reed finished with 12 tackles to lead the team. Miles Bryant, after that great game the previous week, only had 1 tackle. As a side note, Kalen Bullock had 2 interceptions, taking him to 4 for the year. And I predicted him to be the league leader. I don't think he'll get to the 8 that I predicted, but he is 1 behind the league leaders, which are Kevin Byard and Nahshon Wright of the Chicago Bears. All right, that wraps up the Houston Texans. Let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts, folks. The Indianapolis Colts played 96 snaps against the Chiefs in that overtime game. Now, keep that in mind when I get to the Chiefs and how few snaps they played. 96 snaps is basically 1.5 games. So 4 quarters of one game, 2 quarters of another game in terms of equivalent from a snap perspective. With that, you're going to expect a lot of IDP stats. So don't get too carried away, particularly if you go and look at all the defensive lineman stats that I'm not going to read and talk through all of those. But if you see how well Kwity Paye did, for example, or Grover Stewart, don't expect a repeat of that because of the fact this was a 1.5 games that the Colts defense played. And as an example of that, Jermaine Pratt, in 86% of the snaps, came up with 20 tackles. Zaire Franklin, 14 tackles. Now, that's back-to-back games for Franklin with double-digit tackles. Thank goodness we're starting to see it. Once again, propped up by it being a game and a half, but still nice to see some progress from Franklin on tackles. Some news that a lot of people have been waiting for. Jalen Carley's last Wednesday, I record this on Tuesday nights, release it on Wednesday mornings. On Wednesday, Carley's 21-day window was open for him to begin practicing and to be activated from the injured reserve list. There is a chance that could be as soon as this weekend. He was not activated this past weekend. However, I do expect it to be 1 more week because he missed so much time in the spring, preseason, etc. Give him an extra week, unless they're very discouraged by Jermaine Pratt's coverage capabilities. And remember, Jalen Carley's was a safety in college who got transitioned to a linebacker. If you see Carley's being activated for this weekend, my antenna is up. And I did 2 fingers, so I guess that's antennas are up because I'd be worried about Pratt from that regard, losing some snaps to Carley's. If it waits another week, I'll feel better about Pratt. So that's my thoughts on Jalen Carley's for y'all. Samson Ebicon and Taekwon Lewis both returned, but even with that, Latu played 84% of the snaps. Kwity Paye played 75% of the snaps. And that's a lot of freaking snaps for an edge player when you're playing 96 snaps in a whole game. With Ebicon and Lewis both coming back from injury, though, they could have been on a snap count. And so even though they're returning from injury and only played 29% and 16% respectively, Ebicon and Lewis, that was still a lot of snaps coming back from injury. So I expect some things to normalize a little bit. I do expect on a normal game, around 65 snaps, that Latu and Paye's percentages will come back down and Ebicon's and Lewis's will go up. JT Tuimoloau, the rookie out of Ohio State, whose name I butcher every week, as you all know, and probably laugh when you'll hear me butchering it every week. He only played 8% of the snaps with Ebicon and Lewis returning. Now, Latu had an interception, a sack, and 6 tackles. That gives him 3 interceptions on the year. Now, Latu is a great athlete. Don't get me wrong there, an exceptional athlete. But 3 interceptions for edge is not going to be repeatable next year. So when you're looking at Latu and where he finishes the year, even if he gets another interception, you got to discount those interceptions as you look at where he finished. That is just a freak stat for this year. Okay. DeForest Buckner, of course, we've talked about before, is on IR. Adetomowa Adebawore led the defensive tackles again in snaps at 77%, which is a hell of a lot once again for 96 snaps. Played 77% of those. He only had 2 assisted tackles this week, but he did get a half a sack. Grover Stewart was next with 67%, 6 tackles and half a sack. But as I said earlier, be careful about how you interpret some of these stats. Cross and Bonham both played on basically all the snaps. At cornerback, I want you to be aware. As I predicted, when Charvarius Ward would come back, Sauce Gardner and Charvarius Ward on the inside, on the outside, Kenny Moore on the inside. Kenny Moore did play 88% of the snaps. Mekhi Blackman, only 5 snaps in total. Jalen Jones, only 3 snaps in total. So I think we know what the cornerback situation is, and you know who to play and not to play based on that information. All right, let's move to the Jacksonville Jaguars, folks. And the Jacksonville Jaguars played 84 snaps against the Cardinals in this overtime game. 84 snaps, as we were just talking about, lots of stats. That's basically, once again, that would be a little bit over 5 quarters, basically, folks. Once again, for perspective, so you would expect some good IDP stats for these players. Not to mention, they're going against a banged-up Cards offensive line, and Jacoby Brissett holds the ball a long time. So what you should learn from this is that certain players and positions against the Cardinals can be very productive because they're going to get a lot of opportunities with Brissett standing in there as a statue and that O-line struggling. Foye Oluokun, 100% of the snaps, tied for the team lead in tackles with Tim. Devin Lloyd made some big plays, but he only played 74% of the snaps, folks. Don't want you to lose sight of that. He only had 5 tackles, but he had 5 quarterback hits and 1.5 sacks. So look at who's playing the Cardinals. Look at those linebackers. Look at those edge players. You may have some opportunities for some stats, folks. Josh Hines-Allen actually had a sack as well. And as a side note, after a slow start, he's had 3.5 sacks in the last 4 games. And the Jags have a decent amount of favorable matchups throughout the end of the year. Travon Walker missed the game with an injury. No injury update yet for this coming week from that knee that got hurt a couple of weeks ago. At least he didn't get put on IR. I do want to go back and talk about Ventrell Miller. He played 3 snaps for some reason after not playing a single snap since Devin Lloyd returned. Just once again, Devin Lloyd is big play dependent. He is not a tackle machine. Keep that in mind. That is your risk with him relative to other linebackers. Dennis Gardeck played 63% of the snaps with about 75% of those on the edge with Travon Walker out. He had 4 quarterback hits, 1.5 sacks. But this was a good matchup, obviously, for the edge, as you guys are hopefully figuring out, and for blitzing. And that playing time is at risk when Travon Walker comes back. So I have a feeling Dennis Gardeck is going to be near the top of, if you start by points scored last week, Dennis Gardeck will probably be on the top for free agents, but be careful about chasing that. Now, a few years back when he was with the Cardinals, he had a streak where he came in with 8 sacks and then he hurt his knee, and it really has taken him a while to recover from that. But he looks like that Gardeck. But it all depends on playing time, and he's not your typical 4-3 edge defensive end. In the secondary, Jordan Lewis didn't play. Greg Newsome quasi-returned from the injury he had the week before, but only played 32% of the snaps. So Christian Braswell came in and played on the outside when Newsome went out across from Monteric Brown, who I believe his nickname is Buster Brown as a side note. Jerrion Jones was the slot cornerback. Once again, only played 75% of the snaps, or played 75% of the snaps in the slot. Just a reminder, Jerrion Jones is a pure slot cornerback. He has not been playing on the outside, and we do have the possibility of Greg Newsome coming back to full strength, Jordan Lewis potentially coming back. Jerrion Jones could be on the sidelines pretty quick. So be careful. If those guys are back and active, Jerrion Jones could be the odd man out, and you could get a goose egg on your cornerback slot. Andrew Wingard, 100% of the snaps, 67% deep. 10 tackles, tied for the team lead. Antonio Johnson, 96% of the snaps. He only played 46% deep. So very interesting that he played so much more closer to the line of scrimmage this week. Johnson had a 7.4% blitz rate, and he had 5 tackles and a sack as a side note. Did I mention about it's a good opportunity for pass rushers and big plays and so forth to give you a chance to against this Cardinals offense? The thing with Antonio Johnson, though, Eric Murray could be activated this week. Eric Murray was signed to a 3-year, I believe it was $18 million deal. Wingard appears to be clearly ahead of Antonio Johnson. So if Murray gets activated from the IR, be careful if you are using Antonio Johnson. Let us move to the Tennessee Titans, folks. Tennessee Titans only played 48 snaps versus the Seahawks. So the opposite of some of the games we've been just talking about, that's basically the equivalent of playing only 3 quarters in a game. That makes it hard to get any IDP stats. The Tennessee-Seattle game ended up being much more closer / competitive than expected. Tennessee mounted a little bit of a comeback, particularly with that punt return that Jameer DK had, and Seattle really never could put them away from there. But on those 48 snaps, Cody Barton did play 100%. He only had 3 tackles, and I believe only one of those was solo. You know Shawn's thoughts in particular about Cody Barton, and I'll just leave it at that if you've been listening. If not, let's just say he's not a Cody Barton fan. Neither am I, for that matter. Cedric Gray only had 7 tackles on 98% of the snaps. Now, if you were to extrapolate that, if this were a full game, that would probably put him roughly at around 10 tackles, and you would have been happy. 7 tackles, not feeling good, but only 48 snaps. I keep on hearing some people on some talk shows talking about the fact that the Titans' defense is really good against offenses. I think part of the problem is the Titans' defense tends to not be on the field a whole lot. I think it's in those situations. So be careful about that interpretation. Jeff Simmons, 96% of the snaps, which was freaking amazing. Once again, only 48 snaps. So probably roughly about what a typical snap count he'd have in a game, but disappointed in, I believe he only had 2 tackles. Jihad Ward played 88% of the snaps. I've been talking about him because he has defensive tackle eligibility on the MFL, even though he's playing more on the edge. He had 0 tackles, only 1 pass defensive, big letdown. But Arden Key, 2 weeks in a row as he returned from injury with a sack on 67% of the snaps. So good news for Arden Key. At the cornerback position, so I know some people have been playing some of the Tennessee Titan cornerbacks, including myself. Darrell Baker played 100% of the snaps. Now, after that fantastic game he had the previous week, only 2 tackles this week. There was a platoon again of Jalen Armour Davis and Sam Womack. I talked about it last week. I didn't know if Jalen Armour Davis had got injured or something along those lines. It just appears to be some sort of platoon. Armour Davis, 54%. Sam Womack, 46%. Marcus Harris continues to be the slot cornerback, playing 63% of the snaps. At safety, Xavier Woods was out again. Amani Hooker played 100% of the snaps. played only 54% deep. Kevin Winston Jr., 100% of the snaps, he played 63% deep. But Kevin Winston Jr. had 10 tackles on those 48 snaps. However, before you get too excited, you run to the waiver wire. There's a chance that Xavier Woods returns this week. What happened when the Titans had 3 safeties, including Quandre Diggs, that they were trusting? They had this rotation, which was ugly and impacted all 3 of them's IDP stats. If Woods comes back, and since Winston's a rookie, I expect that there will be some sort of rotation that will impact Hooker, Winston, and Woods. From a dynasty perspective, love stashing Winston, but don't jump to throw him into your lineup too quick this week because of that risk of a rotation. All righty, let's move to the AFC West. And let's start with the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos were on bye in Week 12. The big thing to watch will be, will Alex Singleton return from injury? And that injury, as we talked about, and blessings and prayers for all those who are dealing with cancer, have family members dealing with cancer. So he had the testicular cancer surgery. And so we'll see if he is back. Justin Sternard played the green dot role in 100% of the snaps. Trey Greenlaw, remember, disappointed, and he played roughly 60% of the snaps in the last game. So, I'm using so a lot this week, and my apologies for that. That happens when there's just one of me, me and Shawn. But hopefully Greenlaw's snap count will come up, and hopefully Singleton is back healthy. But if not, the fallback is Justin Sternard. Let's move to the Kansas City Chiefs, folks. And the Kansas City Chiefs played only 51 snaps against the Colts in that overtime game. Remember how many snaps. And if you've been skipping around, go listen to the Colts discussion about how many snaps they played. The Chiefs barely played the equivalent of about 3/4 of a game. And this was an overtime game. So when Mahomes and the Chiefs offense is cooking, if you have defensive players going against the Chiefs, and with the Chiefs, with the situation they're in to try and make the playoffs, I really expect Mahomes to become super Mahomes. And that means their offense is going to be on the field a lot, and that means their defense isn't going to play a lot of snaps. Now, it was lucky that Nick Bolton had 8 tackles, tying for the team lead, because typically Bolton on 51 snaps would have had 5 or 6. So he was a little bit more efficient this week. Drew Tranquill played 94% and had 3 tackles. That's what typically happens with Tranquill when they play this low snap count. Chris Jones played 88% of the snaps. George Karlaftis played 84% of the snaps. Trent McDuffie played 100%. He only played 2% in the slot. So what happened a few weeks ago where he got a huge percentage of his snaps in the slot, that has not repeated, so we can give up on that hope. Brian Cook has returned to playing 100% of the snaps. Connor played 91% of his snaps close to the line of scrimmage. He also played 100% of the snaps. Cook only played 45% deep against the Colts. Now, from what I've been reading, a lot of people are trying to take away that across the middle stuff that Daniel Jones has been doing with Pittman and Warren and Downs and so forth, challenge them to beat them deep or on the outside. And it feels like that's what was happening with Cook and Connor being a little bit more close to the line of scrimmage, Cook in particular, than he typically plays. That's Ricky's pure speculation. I didn't have a chance to research in great details, folks. Christian Roland Wallace continues to be the 5th defensive back. He played 43% of the snaps, 46% of those in the slot. He had a 13.6% blitz rate compared to Chamari Connor, who only had a 3.9% blitz rate. Once again, shout out to PFF for that information. Christian Roland Wallace had 7 tackles in a pass defense. Don't chase those stats. He's not playing enough snaps to justify that, and the Chiefs' defense is not going to probably play enough snaps to justify that will happen on a regular basis. Jaden Hicks was all the way down to 30% of the snaps this week. All righty, let's move on to the Raiders. And the Raiders played only 51 snaps against the Browns. As a result, Devin White, for when they were playing over 80 snaps a week, was getting 16 tackles, 12 tackles, etc. Well, this week on 51 snaps, only had 6 tackles, tied for second on the team behind Max Crosby, who had 8 tackles, including 3 quarterback hits and 5 tackles for loss. When the Browns are playing a team that has a, excuse me, okay, skip. We're going to just skip that. I'd cut it out if I could, but I can't, so we'll just move on. Max Crosby had a hell of a game, 8 tackles, 3 quarterback hits, 5 tackles for loss. Here's another PSA related to the number 2 linebacker spot. Landon Roberts jumped back up to 67% of the snaps, but only had 3 tackles. Did get a fumble recovery. Once again, the team did not play very much on defense. Jamal Adams was all the way down to 27% of the snaps. Jamin Davis, after playing 19% of the snaps the previous week, mostly in the first half, played a big whopping 0 snaps on defense. Zilch, nada, zippo, 0, nothing. Jamin Davis, told you not to chase him. Hopefully you did not. That would have been in the deepest of leagues. Malcolm Kuntz was down to 27%. He did have a sack. Tyree Wilson down to 33%. Charles Snowden, who we talked about last week, we were shocked that his playing time had dropped all the way from 44% down to 27% after he was so productive in that week. He played 44% of the snaps. Well, this week he jumps to a season high 59%, has a really productive game, including getting an interception. He's the number 2. Obviously, Crosby is the number 1, but still not chasing him, but he might be worth keeping an eye on. At the defensive tackle position, Jonah Laulu played 86% of the snaps, Adam Butler 80%. Once again, that's on a low snap count. That's why those were jacked up so high. Jeremy Chin only played 4% of the snaps deep. He had 6 tackles, tied for second on the team. There was a rotation across from Eric Stokes again this week with Caillou Blue Kelly at 51%, Darian Porter at 49%. Darren Porter actually started the game, and then they went to Caillou Blue Kelly. But right now, they just continue, it appears, to want to give Darian Porter about half the snaps to continue to ramp him up. Because remember, he was a wide receiver in college and transitioned to cornerback late in his career in college. Let's move to the Chargers now. The Chargers had a bye in Week 12. So we're going to just move on past the Chargers and move on past the AFC and move on to the NFC. And let's go ahead and go to the Dallas Cowboys here, folks. And the Dallas Cowboys played 63 snaps versus the Eagles and came back from that 21-0 deficit in the first half to pull out the 24-21 victory. This is a totally new defense. So when you're looking at your offensive players going against the Cowboys, and you're going to see them ranked fairly low against wide receivers and running backs, you cannot use that in your decision-making anymore, because the last 2 games, it is a totally different defense with the acquisitions of Logan Wilson, with Quinnen Williams, with the return from injured reserve of DeMarvion Overshown, of Siobhan Revel, with the acquisition of Kenny Clark previously, who's getting more playing time. Donovan Izruko, the rookie who continues to ascend. Jadeveon Clowney, who they signed after the season began, continues to have great pass rush win rates. So this is a totally different defense, folks. So be careful about if it says, oh, the Cowboys are ranked 30th against running backs, or whatever the number might be. Be careful about throwing your running backs in just because of that situation as the year progresses. Okay. With all that being said, you'll also be shocked to hear who the Cowboys' leading tackler was in this game. The linebacker position, though, quite a mess. And we're not going to play any of the linebackers for the Dallas Cowboys this coming week, because the rotation continued, and the rotation was ugly, with Kenneth Murray at 62%, Logan Wilson 38%, DeMarvion Overshown 59%, Shamar James 19%, Maris Lufau 13%. Overshown had 5 tackles, Murray had 3, James and Wilson only had 2 tackles. I am now worried that because of the success the Cowboys defense is having, Eberflus and Schottenheimer might be saying, let's keep everybody happy. Let's keep this rotation thing going. Get them all in the field. It's working. It's keeping them fresh. Our defense is playing well overall. Let's keep the rotation going. I think this rotation is going to continue for a period of time. If there's one that breaks through with a non-rotation, it'll be DeMarvion Overshown. But I still think they're ramping him up, just like what's happening with Nakobe Dean. We'll talk about the Eagles here in a little bit. So I think it might be another game or two before Overshown plays closer to, let's say, 90%. But Murray and Wilson, I think, will continue to rotate. That's Ricky's opinion. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm thinking right now, folks. Quinnen Williams was up to 73%. He continues to be a monster. If you actually watch the game, you got to see how he was impacting things. Sort of like Chris Jones does, in that this week, Williams only had one tackle and one quarterback hit, which almost sounds like a Chris Jones line. But from an NFL perspective, Quinnen Williams was a beast out there. I do expect with the increased pressures, and the Cowboys' edges, while they're maybe not getting as many sacks, are getting a lot of pressures, hits, and hurries on the quarterback. With all that happening, once again, this defense is something else. Osa Digizua, though, he played 67% of the snaps again. He had 4 tackles, 4 quarterback hits, and a sack. Kenny Clark was, by the way, number 3 at 63% of the snaps at tackle. He only had 1 tackle. Back to Donovan Izuruku, who played 59% of the snaps. Next was Jadeveon Clowney at 43%. James Houston, who had a big jump up the week before, was down to 30%. Sam Williams was at 35%. Dante Fowler, who was at 18% last week, coming back from an injury, jumped up to 37%. Okay? And when I said 18% last week, I meant the previous week, and then 37%. So Houston seemed to have jumped into Fowler's role while Fowler was ramping back up. Then things returned back to normal as Fowler was a little bit healthier. We play in Izuruku as a number 2 defensive end, and I'm still pretty high on Clowney, even at 43% of the snaps because of his pass rush win rate and the metrics I'm seeing on PFF on Jadeveon Clowney. There's a lot of other players that play ahead of him, but particularly in Week 14 when there's 4 teams on bye, you may be in a desperate situation in your deeper leagues, and Clowney might be someone to consider. I do expect this rotation to continue as is at roughly the same percentages because it is being so effective. And once again, as I've said, how the Cowboys defense has performed these last 2 weeks. At cornerback, Deron Bland played 95% of snaps. Kalen Carson played 40%. Siobhan Revel continues to be eased in as he comes back from that ACL injury in college in his first year, the rookie, and he played 62% of the snaps. Trevin Diggs will return at some point as a side note. Let's not forget about that. And when that happens, I think we'll see Bland and Diggs on the outside, Bland moving to the inside, and they're in 3 wide, and Bland and Revel eventually taking that other outside cornerback position. Reddy Stewart would be the odd man out, but he was, once again, being back to the slot cornerback this week, playing 57% of the snaps with 72% of the slot. He blitzed 17% of the time. He led the team with 6 tackles on those 63 snaps that they played against the Eagles. They being the Cowboys playing 63 snaps. Donovan Wilson played 60% of his snaps deep. Malik Hooker played 78% of his snaps deep. Marquise Bell played 14% of the snaps. Hooker only played 87%. I didn't see or hear anything about Hooker being dinged up, so just something to keep an eye on, but hopefully you're not playing Malik Hooker right now. All right, that completes the Cowboys. There was certainly a lot to unpack there. And let's move to the New York Giants here. And the New York Giants played 69 snaps in an overtime game versus the Lions, so just slightly more than average, even though this went to overtime. They will have a new interim defensive coordinator as Shane Bowen was fired on Monday. So the Giants will have a new DC. They've blown, I believe, it was 6 leads, where in many of those, if not all of them, they had a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter. I think it was many of them, not all of them. But when you do that's going to cost you your job as a defensive coordinator, and that's what happened to Shane Bowen. Now, the Giants could be almost in playoff contention if they had won even half of those games, which they had a chance to do, including against the New Orleans Saints, my beloved Saints. All right, let's go to the linebacker position. Okereke played 100% of the snaps. He had 8 tackles. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, who stepped into that Darius Musa role, who had stepped in for Micah McFadden. Well, Flanagan Files left the game with the injury after 16% of snaps. Next man up was Zaire Barnes. He played 54% of snaps, had 5 tackles, and he was hurt. And then Swayze Bowman came in with 26% of snaps. In my notes, I put next with exclamation points because I don't want Zaire Barnes or Swayze Bowman in my team as we're getting closer and closer to playoff time. Those guys have bounced around a lot. If you thought DFF, Flanagan Files, had bounced around a lot, those guys have really bounced around. I'm not taking a chance on those two guys, even if I'm desperate. Okay, Brian Burns played 84% of the snaps, and unfortunately, he didn't give us any sacks. He did have 2 assisted tackles, but no sacks for Brian Burns. But we're not benching Brian Burns off a win-bad game on the year he's had. Kayvon Thibodeau did not play for the second week in a row. Abdul Carter, 91% of the snaps. He had 4 tackles and 3 quarterback hits. I talked about it earlier in the show, but for those that missed it, these rookie edges, Jalen Walkers and James Pierces and Abdul Carters, we're continuing to see some progress as the years are progressing. If you've been benching Abdul Carter but sitting on him, it's getting close to where we might be able to start putting him into our lineups. Don't give up on him. Keep that in mind. Darius Alexander led the defensive tackles in snaps at 54%, which was a career high for the rookie. He had 4 tackles and 2 sacks. Okay, we're not chasing this, but we're going to monitor it. The Lions interior, as a side note, is really struggling right now. The tackles are doing okay with Decker and Sewell, although Decker's he's battling an injury, and he's not his typical self either. That interior lines are struggling. Makes me worry for the Lions offense in general, but it's creating opportunities for interior defensive linemen going against the Lions. And if I recall correctly, the Packers are playing this Lions this coming week. Love me some Devontae Wyatt if that's the case this coming week on Thanksgiving Day. All righty, Dexter Lawrence only played 52% of the snaps. I didn't go back and read and double check, but I think that is his lowest snap count for the year, and he had 1 tackle, 1 quarterback hit. Tyler Nubin did not play for the second week in a row. When that happens, we know that's great news for Dane Belton, and he plays close to the line of scrimmage. And he played 100% of the snaps, and he had 9 tackles to lead the team. He only played 55% deep, where Javon Holland plays 73% of the snaps deep. Drew Phillips, we've talked about it for several weeks now, is a slot-only cornerback. He was up to 63% of the snaps this week, which is a high versus the past couple of weeks. And that resulted in him having 5 tackles. As a reminder, the New York Giants are on bye in week 14. Let's move to the Philadelphia Eagles, folks. And the Philadelphia Eagles played 74 snaps against the Cowboys. Jalen Phillips played 80% of the snaps this week, but did not get any sacks for us. And I think he only had 1 tackle. I didn't mark it in my notes. Sorry about that. But we're still playing Jalen Phillips as an edge, too, as a side note. Jalix Hunt was down to 58%. Nolan Smith jumped all the way up to 54% of the snaps in his 3rd game back. Brandon Graham in his 3rd game played 11% of the snaps. So Jalix Hunt, Shawn and I talked about that last week. We expected it to come down. We did expect Nolan Smith to come up. It actually, from what I was thinking, that percentage was a little bit closer than I expected, which is bad news for Jalix Hunt. All righty. Moving to the defensive tackle position, some actually good news. Jordan Davis, after 3 games in a row of a decreasing snap percent, was all the way up back to 66% and finished 2nd among the Eagles defensive tackles in terms of snap percent. He was back over Moro Ojomo. Ojomo only played 59% of the snaps. Jalen Carter played 95% of the snaps. Now, Davis had 6 tackles. I believe only 1 of those was solo. I believe the other 5 were assisted, but still 6 tackles on that 66%. When he's playing that kind of snap count, we can use Jordan Davis in defensive tackle required leagues. Jalen Carter, who's been playing a lot of snaps for most of the year, but it wasn't translating to IDP productivity, Actually, once again, for the second week in a row, gave us some IDP stats with 5 tackles and a quarterback hit. So good news for Jalen Carter there. Bad news for Moro Ojimo, who only had that 1 tackle in the 59% of snaps. Zach Bond, 100% of the snaps, 9 tackles to lead the team, plus a fumble recovery. The big story at linebacker, though, Nakobe Dean jumped a season-high 84% of the snaps in his 5th game from the 68% mark that he had been roughly the past couple of weeks. 5 tackles and a sack. He had the only sack for the team as an FYI, and he's had 3 sacks in the last 3 games. If he's playing 84% of the snaps, what does that mean for Jihad Campbell? That means he's hardly playing. Jihad played only 15% of the snaps this week after, in the previous 3 weeks, going from most recent to the furthest out, 35%, 50%, 40%. Of course, he was playing 85 to 90% before Nakobe Dean was activated. This is bad news for Jihad Campbell. You can drop Jihad Campbell in redraft leagues right now. Blankenship and Makuba were both injured. Makuba's going to require surgery and is probably out for the year. Blankenship did return. Adoree Jackson was injured as well, but Adoree Jackson was listed as a full participant in practice today. I saw that just shortly before I started recording this about Adoree Jackson, which is good news for Cooper DeJean, because I was about to give you a Scooby-Doo related to Cooper DeJean, because when Adoree Jackson went out, Cooper DeJean ended up playing 57% of the snaps on the outside, because Adoree Jackson had played 35% of the snaps before he went out. That was a high for DeJean for the year. He still had 7 tackles in the pass defense, but I was worried, boy, if Adoree Jackson's out, Cooper DeJean may end up playing on the outside, because Michael Carter came in and he played 88% of his snaps in the slot. Carter played 34% total. 88% of those were in the slot. Now Carter only had 1 tackle. So as long as Adoree Jackson comes back, I think we're okay. But if Adoree Jackson comes back, it looks like DeJean will be on the outside and Carter will be in the slot. That's a roll from those that are familiar with Scooby-Doo from the old cartoon days. Okay, the Washington Commanders are next. The Washington Commanders were on a bye. The secondary, you may recall, is banged up. Mike Sainristil played 100% of the snaps last game as a reminder, but he only played 4% of the slot, which is bad news for him. And I don't expect any of these other cornerbacks potentially back, so that could be really bad news for Mike Sainristil. The other thing to recall is that safety rotation between Quan Martin and Jeremy Reeves, where one was playing in the mid-90s and one was playing in the high 60s, and it was rotating week to week in terms of which one. Not sure which one it's going to be this week. You're taking a gamble if you're playing Martin or Reeves this coming week. All righty, I need some water, folks, so give me a second here. All right, we're going to move on to the NFC Central, and we're going to move to the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears played 72 snaps against the Pittsburgh Steelers, so they played more than average. The linebacker situation is a mess, and the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers could not take advantage of that is just mind-boggling. Tremaine Edmonds, who had been having a fantastic year, probably the best year of his career, next to maybe his rookie year, had to go on IR. Expected to be out 4 to 6 weeks. Bad news for those that have been leveraging him throughout the year. TJ Edwards was out again with that hand surgery / hamstring issue. Noah Sewell was out. All 3 were shown as DNPs in the latest practice report. Bad news for them this coming week. DeMarco Jackson, the former Saint. Ricky, we know you're a Saint lover. Why are you calling this out? That's because Dennis Allen got DeMarco Jackson off of waivers when the Saints let him go. Dennis Allen, remember, was the former head coach of the Saints and defensive coordinator. DeMarco Jackson knows his system. DeMarco Jackson wore the green dot with all those other 3 out. He led the team with 15 tackles. Ruben Hippolyte II, who was the 4th-round draft pick out of South Carolina this year, started as the number 2 linebacker, played 18% of the snaps, and then got injured. What a bummer for the rookie. Finally getting a little bit of an opportunity, gets hurt, and he's out. That meant bear with me here, Agbombamiga played 58% of the snaps after Hippolyte went out. And he also missed a little bit of time as a side note with injury, but he finished with 14 tackles. I don't think I'm trusting Amen, and I'm not going to try and say his last name again, but if DeMarco Jackson is the green dot, which it certainly looks like he will be, and that green dot has been an effective role in the Dennis Allen system, we're going to play some DeMarco Jackson, folks. And if he's on waivers, we're certainly grabbing him. Okay. So it may be just one more week, but I'm expecting all three of these others to be out. Of course, Tremaine Edmonds definitely will be because he's on IR. But with Edwards out and Sewell out, we're playing DeMarco Jackson. On the edge, Austin Booker once again played a high volume of snaps at 78%, down from his 93%, only 2 tackles and a quarterback hit. Disappointed. I was hoping for a little bit more from him. Montez Sweat, 75% of the snaps, another sack. He's had a sack in 5 of the last 6 games, if I did that correctly very quickly. He finished this game, by the way, with 3 tackles and 2 sacks. He now is at 7.5 for the year. So Sweat went from someone a couple years ago, you're starting him every week, to last year, as the year progressed, you couldn't even play him, to now he's pretty much an every week starter as a number 2 defensive end. Byard and Brisker both played 100% of the snaps at safety. Kevin Byard, 6 tackles. Jaquan Brisker, 7 tackles. The good news about Brisker is he played only 25% of his snaps deep, which means he played 75% close to line of scrimmage. And for those, when I use that close to line of scrimmage term, that aren't familiar, that are new to the show, that means they played either on the defensive line, in the box, or in the slot when I use the term close to the line of scrimmage. Chauncey Gardner Jr., very disappointing. He played 90% of the snaps. He was basically close to the line of scrimmage on 100% of those. He had a 6.2% blitz rate. He had 1 tackle. Okay, so he had that big game a couple of weeks ago in his first game where he had 4 tackles and a sack. Didn't do much last week. It was blah. Excuse me, in week 2, it was blah. And now this past week, his 3rd week of starting, really bad. So where last week Shawn and I were talking about the fact that Gardner Johnson was probably taking Kyler Gordon's job, I am not so sure that's the case. Kyler Gordon is being activated from IR. At least that's the expectation. He had another full practice again today. Plus, with Tyreek Stevenson hurt, I do expect Kyler Gordon to be activated. It'll be interesting to see if they ease him in and they do a platoon with Gardner Johnson, or if they just go full bore with Gordon. Dennis Allen does have a place in his heart for Gardner Johnson, so maybe Ricky's wrong, but I think there's a high probability that Gordon takes that role back over. Okay, I mentioned Tyreek Stevenson being hurt. Jalen Johnson, who got that big contract in the offseason, who's their top cornerback for the Bears, who's been injured and has played very few snaps this year, he also practiced in full, and there's a good probability that he also will be activated off of injured reserve. If that happens, I could see him and Nashawn Wright being the 2 starting outside cornerbacks and Tyreek Stevenson being the odd man out, because Nashawn Wright's having a fantastic year. If you didn't see his interception this past Sunday, go and check it out. I had to rewind it a couple of times when I saw it. Beautiful one-hander toe tapper on the sideline that he got. That's 5 interceptions for him. As I noted earlier in the show, he's tied for the team lead in interceptions with his teammate Kevin Byard. And by the way, Nashawn Wright also threw in 6 tackles this week. So Ricky's expectations in summarizing all that defensive cornerback stuff for the Bears. I expect Johnson and Gordon to be activated. I expect Wright and Johnson to be your starters. And I think that Gordon will take over for Gardner Johnson eventually, but probably a rotation in this first week of Gordon being back between Gordon and Gardner Johnson. We'll see if my crystal ball is correct on that. Let's move to the Detroit Lions, folks. And the Detroit Lions played 82 snaps versus the Giants in that overtime game. Let's start with some injury news where Marcus Davenport and Josh Paschal. Davenport have been practicing and they're on injured reserve. Davenport looks highly probable to be activated. I thought Paschal was as well until he went from a full practice to a limited practice, if I saw in the fine print correctly in my trying to get all this stuff accumulated because of my LSU trip. But I think if Davenport is back, I think that is going to be a very big helper for Aiden Hutchinson. I really, really do, as opposed to having folks like Tyler Lacey or Al-Qadim Muhammad or even Derek Barnes playing across from Hutchinson. Now, Hutchinson had a phenomenal game. Now, remember, this was 82 snaps. That's the basically 5 full quarters of a game. Keep that in mind. But Hutchinson had 6 tackles, 6 quarterback hits, and a sack. His sack, of course, ended the game. It was on the last play of the game. So he took him home. If Hutchinson can give us some tackles every week, that'd be fantastic. We haven't been seeing the tackles we're hoping for Hutchinson. Maybe this is a good sign that instead of just going sack crazy and missing out on tackle opportunities by putting himself out of position, maybe we get some more tackles out of Hutchinson as the year progresses. Derek Barnes did play 80% of the snaps. He got 6 tackles, but he also got a quasi stiff arm and juked by Jameis Winston on that trick touchdown play. Derek Barnes must have gotten a lot of grief in the linebacker room or the defensive room for the Detroit Lions when they showed that play. We'll just leave it at that. Jameis Winston, love him, man. He love his attitude and his positivity and all that kind of good stuff. Love the fact that Jameis Winston also thinks he can play tight end if need be. Jack Campbell played 100% of the snaps, led the team with 11 tackles. Anzalone played 96% of the snaps, but had a disappointing 6 tackles on those 82 snaps. Very, very disappointing. Kirby Joseph was out yet again. Thomas Harper played his role and played 89% deep, which is even a little bit more than Kirby Joseph typically plays. He started there. I believe that's the 4th week in a row that Harper has started in place of Kirby Joseph. Harper had 6 tackles and 2 pass defenses, which is a good game for playing that much deep, but on 82 snaps. Keep that in mind, folks. Joseph is still not practicing. I don't expect to see him on Thanksgiving Day. Expect Joseph to be rolled out. DJ Reed did come back from IR. He was eased back in with only 38% of the snaps. Terry and Arnold was out. But we could be in a situation where fairly soon, maybe not on Thanksgiving Day, but the following week, that the Lions get their starting safety back with Arnold and Reed on the outside, with Branch and Joseph at safety. Hopefully they'll be back at that point from a defensive perspective. And with better defensive backs, hopefully that helps folks like Hutchinson and Davenport from a pass rush perspective to get to the quarterback, because the quarterback has to hold the ball a little bit longer. Let's go ahead and move to the Green Bay Packers, folks, who only played 44 snaps against that pathetic Minnesota Vikings offense, where their offensive line is struggling and their quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, is really, really struggling. What does that mean, folks? You have the opportunity to play a lot of your defensive players against the Vikings. And the Vikings may be with Max Brosmer this coming week, because J.J. McCarthy was put into the concussion protocol after the game. So play your teams that are playing against the Vikings, depending on which position, so forth. You have an opportunity to get those IDPs into your lineup. Let's go back and talk about the Packers. Micah Parsons played 91% of the snaps. Some of these snap percentages are going to be pretty high because they played so few snaps, only 44 snaps. He had 2 sacks, which was 2 tackles, basically. That's what he had, which gives him 10 year-to-date. His career high, if I remember correctly, is 14. So I think he has a good chance of breaking that. On the ESPN NFL show today, as I was kind of studying and preparing and listening to the show in the background, they talked about how they're using Micah Parsons, kind of using him behind a defensive tackle over the center, and it's really causing 3 interior linemen to have to account for him, which is creating other opportunities and havoc for the rest of the defensive line. Rashawn Gary was back up to 73%, but let's just say he didn't perform up to expectations. Kingsley Enagbare, who had played more snaps the previous week, was back down to 34%. Lucas Van Ness returns from injury, only played 14%. I expect him to bump up into that 30 to 40% range, and you may see Rashawn Gary, his snap count, come down a little bit. Devontae Wyatt was back up to number 1 in snaps at the defensive tackle position for the Packers. He played 77%, which was a season high in terms of snap percent. And he came through with 3 tackles and 2 sacks. He's been very inconsistent for IDP, but as I just said, I love him against the Lions this coming week. Quay Walker was out with a stinger and shoulder injury. Isaiah McDuffie, as we talked about last week, stepped in for him, played 100% of the snaps, had 9 tackles and only 44 snaps, which is fantastic. Got half a sack, and he got an INT. I could have potentially gotten that INT as well as it kind of floated into his hands there, but he got it, and fantastic game for Isaiah McDuffie if he used him. Edgerrin Cooper, 100% of the snaps, only 4 tackles. Man, not getting those big plays that he was last year, the tackles for loss and sacks. And yes, I have to listen to what I just said. It was only on 44 snaps, but Cooper has been quite the disappointment. He's at a low end 2, high end 3 right now in terms of how to think about Edgerrin Cooper. By the way, as a side note, in case Quay Walker is out and for whatever reason becomes extended, Tyron Hopper, the rookie who was drafted the same year as Edgerrin Cooper, which means he's in his second year. Hopper was the third linebacker. Hopper was the third linebacker, to be clear, with 41% of the snaps played. Nate Hobbs is injured and not active. The big news is Keyshawn Nixon was injured and only played 30% of the snaps. Kamal Haddon or Hayden, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, played the other 70% of the snaps. So with that, Evan Williams actually played 100% of the snaps, which he usually plays around, let's just call it about 88 to 90%, and Bullard gets some of his deep snaps. But with that additional injury, with Nixon out, Hobbs out, Evan Williams actually played a full 100% of the snaps. Xavier McKinney played 66% of the snaps deep as an FYI. Let us move on to the Minnesota Vikings, folks. The Minnesota Vikings played 66 snaps versus the Packers. Look, that Packers-Vikings game was a slow, dull, boring game. Apologies if you're a Packers or Vikings fan, but that's what it was. But if you're a Packers fan, at least you got a victory. And if you're a Vikings fan, you're probably depressed as all heck. On the edge, Jonathan Grenard did not play again with that shoulder injury. That's 2 weeks in a row he's missed, but there is a chance he plays this week. We'll need to watch the injury report. Dallas Turner, after playing 89% of the snaps the previous week, was all the way down to 58% of the snaps. He had 3 tackles. He did get a sack, which kind of saved his day. Tyron Ingram-Dawkins, that's hyphenated, Ingram-Dawkins, the rookie out of Georgia, played 26% of the snaps as the third edge. So he kind of picked up those snaps that Dallas Turner had played previously. Andrew Van Ginkel, AVG, played 85% of the snaps at 5 tackles. It's been reported, and I didn't get a chance to study it, to be honest, that he's been dropping a little bit more into coverage. And the other thing that's been happening is Eric Wilson has continued to rush from his linebacker position more. That's not what we want to have happening, to be honest, folks. That's bad for Andrew Van Ginkel. We knew that Andrew Van Ginkel would not repeat the type of numbers he had last year. And hopefully you didn't draft him with that thought process in mind, because there were so many outliers in his numbers last year with interceptions and touchdowns and things along those lines. But we certainly don't want him dropping into coverage that much. So hopefully that normalizes. The Vikings continue to drive me crazy with that utilization of Javon Hargrave. We're out on him, we're in on him. We're out on him, we're in on him. Well, all of a sudden, after 33% of the snaps last week, he jumps all the way back up to 61%, and he comes up with 6 tackles. We can't trust what's going to happen there. And his counterpart has been Levi Drake Rodriguez, no relation because he has a Z on the end of his name, by the way. But, they've been rotating in terms of who plays the most among the two of them. And that may continue. So we can't trust Hargrave, even though he had those 6 tackles. Blake Cashman, 95% of the snaps, 16 tackles. Eric Wilson, 95% of the snaps, all the way down to 4 tackles. Very disappointing output from Eric Wilson. Ivan Pace was all the way down to 5% of the snaps. He was in that 19% range the week before, all the way down to 5%. People are Ivan Pace fans, so that's why I'm letting you know what it looks like. As a side note, Cashman, since he's come back from his injury and then got reoriented, for lack of a better term, has now had 5 straight games with double-digit tackles. Clearly a top 12 linebacker for IDPs, probably even a top 6 linebacker. Theo Jackson, after playing only 13% of the snaps a week before, played more, but it was only 67% of the snaps. Not in that 80+% range that we'd want, or high 80s that we want. 55% of his snaps deep, so he usually plays a little bit more deep. So when he was on the field, he wasn't as deep, which is good news. And he did come with 7 tackles. We just have to monitor it at this point, folks. You still can't play him, but hopefully that snap count gets back up to where it needs to be. Harrison Smith played 92% of snaps, 64% deep, only one assisted tackle. Ugh. 36 years old, good veteran on the field, blah, 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 but you can't play Harrison Smith, folks. Josh Metellus, 83% of the snaps. There was a knee injury scare during the game, but luckily he did return. He only played 14% of the snaps deep, and even with missing the time and only playing 83% of the snaps, he got 12 tackles, but once again, only 14% deep, 86% close to line of scrimmage. Great news for Josh Metellus as we move forward here. Speaking of moving forward, let us move forward to the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons played 80 snaps on defense against my New Orleans Saints. Once again, that's about 5/4 of a game. That's a lot of snaps. Some of these numbers could be inflated. But first, let's start with Divine Diablo coming back from IR. And he took his role back right away from Ronnie Harrison, who was super productive from an IDP perspective the week before. Well, that role was gone. Harrison moved to the third linebacker role and played 23% of the snaps. Don't even ask about J.D. Bertrand as a side note. But Diablo in his return had 8 tackles. Caden Ellis had his typical 100% and only 9 tackles. We'd like to have seen a little bit more out of both of those two, to be honest with you, on 80 snaps, but we'll take it. Leonard Floyd returned from injury after missing a couple of weeks, had a riftable effect from playing time as Jalen Walker went down from the mid-60s to the 51%. Walker still did get a sack. That was his one tackle. It was a sack. So he continues to at least get some production off the edge, particularly in big play scoring. James Pierce was down to 49% from, let's just call it the high 50s, 58, 59%, that range. He had 2 tackles and a sack and a half in this game, and I believe that's 3 weeks in a row with a sack for James Pierce. Once again, I'm talking about these rookies. I've mentioned a couple of times earlier with folks like Abdul Carter. Continue to see improved productivity from an IDP stats perspective with these rookies. Mike Green was another one we talked about earlier, that as we get late in the year, you might be able to start trusting them, particularly if there's injuries that might take hold on some of your edge players. Brandon Darlis jumped to number 1 in defensive tackle snaps this week for the Falcons. He had 4 tackles and a sack and a half in this game. Now, there was a time, I told you a couple of weeks ago, we're not going to chase Brandon Darlis. But now we've seen enough of a trend that I feel comfortable adding him and playing him as a number 2 defensive tackle. So once again, I apologize that I won't have the waiver list at the end of the show, but I'm trying to tell you about all these folks as I'm going team by team here. And Brandon Darlis in defensive tackle required leagues is someone you could pick up as a number 2 defensive tackle. And by the way, while I didn't call it out specifically, like Jordan Davis, who jumped back up to 66%, someone you can consider picking up in defensive tackle required leagues. Jesse Bates, 41% deep. Xavier Watts, 32% deep. Watts had his first interception since September. At the slot position, Billy Bowman tore his Achilles, went to IR. Very unfortunate for the rookie from Oklahoma. D. Alford returned to his role where he was very productive last year. Maybe not the top stud from an NFL perspective, but when he's playing and getting the snap count, if the other team the Falcons are playing plays a lot of 3 wide, if he's getting that snap count, D. Alford will be very effective for cornerback IDPs. He actually led the team with 10 tackles and a fumble recovery. He played 78% of the snaps, 87% of those in the slot. So very, very effective for D. Alford. Let's move on to the Carolina Panthers. And the Carolina Panthers played 70 snaps against the San Francisco 49ers. Let's start at linebacker position where Trevin Wallace and Christian Roseboom were both not playing due to injury. Claudin Cherlis started the game with the green dot, as we told you would happen, and as the last game had finished. He played 40% of the snaps, but then left the game with a concussion, and he had 4 tackles before he left. Chris Barnes, who they called up from the practice squad, he started as a number 2 linebacker and then took over as the green dot and ended up playing 99% of the snaps in total. He led the team with 10 tackles. Bam Martin Scott, the undrafted free agent this year. He became the number 2 linebacker, got 46% of snaps, and had 6 tackles, including 1 tackle for loss, where he just blew through the line of scrimmage. It was a pretty play. Not sure I'm trusting Bam, Martin, Scott if Wallace and Roseboom and Cherilus are all out. But if all those 3 are out, Chris Barnes is someone in deeper leagues I would pick up and actually play. So Chris Barnes is another one for the waiver wire here, folks. As a side note, the Panthers signed Isaiah Simmons, the former number 1 pick of the Arizona Cardinals, who was playing linebacker, cornerback, slot cornerback, you name it, safety. They were playing him all over, never really let him specialize. The Packers tried to have him play just linebacker in the preseason, but with their depth, they freed him up and let him go. Finally got signed by someone with the Panthers, and with all the injuries, Simmons could be a practice squad elevation for the Panthers this coming week for a desperate situation and probably for special teams, though. You're not chasing Isaiah Simmons. I mean, really clear on that. Do not chase Isaiah Simmons. But someone as the year progresses, depending on what happens with Wallace, Roseboom, Cherilus, etc., he may end up getting on the field, folks. On the defensive line, Tershawn Wharton played 83% of the snaps. He's been playing in the 80s to low 90s over the last several weeks. He finished with 6 tackles. Derek Brown played 73%, and he actually had some stats this week after having none last week. He had 3 assisted tackles. Ashawn Robinson, another one that's been yo-yo in terms of playing time. And at one point I said you could drop him when he went all the way down to 29% of the snaps. He played back up to 56% of snaps and had 7 tackles. So I kind of regret not letting a trend happen before I told you all to drop him. But Ashawn Robinson, it could be a back and forth thing. I'm not sure what's driving it. I wouldn't drop him if I have him right now if you didn't drop him last week, but I'm not in a hurry to play him unless I'm desperate because just don't know how much he's actually going to play from week to week. Okay, I was in a bad situation in one league where I had Alex Wright out, Trevon Walker out. So I had to pick up Nick Skirton. And 3 of the last 4 games, Nick Skirton had been very effective. Had picked up some junk sacks. They were junk sacks. And he had a decent tackle floor. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to pick him up. And of course, he doesn't do crap because I had to play him. Luckily, that team still won. But he only had 2 tackles. DJ Wanham, 64%. Skirton, 69%. Wanham actually had 5 tackles. Probably should have picked him up. Okay, Princely, the rookie, played 20% of the snaps. Now, that kind of takes care of the edge. We've talked about Skirton in the past and Wanham in the past. You know how we feel about him. Chevin Murray played 100% of the snaps, had 8 tackles, and he threw a cheap shot punch where no man should be punched during the game. And, of course, the cameras catch just about everything in these games, folks. And, of course, he got caught, and he has been suspended for 1 game. Now, not long before I started recording this evening, I saw that he is appealing that. There's a small chance that it'll be changed from a suspension to a fine. But after Jamar Chase was suspended for a game and couldn't play for the spitting, I don't see how they can't not suspend Morig for this game. So I expect Morig to be out. I expect Lathan Ransom, the rookie out of Ohio State, to play the Morig role close to the line of scrimmage. If you need someone for 1 week, Ransom could be your man. Could be a gamble because Ricky's speculating here, but I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen because Ransom in college was much more effective close to the box, even though he's been playing more deep when he's on the field, when they go to 3 safeties or if Nick Scott happened to be out or whatever. Nick Scott is clearly the deep safety as a side note. So what I expect is that Ransom will take that Morig role, Scott will stay in his usual role, and Ransom could be a 1-week play. At the cornerback position, for those interested in the slot position, Shaw Smith-Wade, we talked about a little bit last week. Something had happened that Corey Thornton played more slot snaps than Shaw Smith-Wade did. And Shaw's CHAU as FYI, that's Shaw. Corey Thornton, Troy Aikman even talked about it, that he had basically leapfrogged, Ricky's word, not Aikman's, he had leapfrogged Smith-Wade to start in the slot. Well, J.C. Horn had 2 interceptions, but when he went on the sidelines, J.C. Horn ralphed, puked, barfed, whatever, threw up, whatever choice you want to use. And so when that happened, Corey Thornton had to move to the outside to take his place along with Mike Jackson. That lets Shaw Smith-Wade back on the field. Then what happened? Thornton gets hurt. So then at that point in time, Shaw Smith-Wade had to move to the outside. And you had some situations where you had Lathan Rantham being the fifth defensive back, but you also had, and I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, A. Evans. A is the abbreviation for his first name, former Vikings cornerback who got a few snaps in there as well. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But Shaw Smith-Wade may have his job back at slot cornerback because either Horn or Thornton may be out. But if they're both out, that would be bad news for Shaw Smith-Wade with him being on the outside and probably can't play him in your deeper leagues. As a reminder, the Panthers are on bye in week 14. Let's move on to my beloved New Orleans Saints, folks. My beloved Saints only had to play 56 snaps versus the Falcons. Chase Young, once again, 71% of snaps, a good, healthy number. 4 tackles and once again, another sack. That's 4 sacks in 6 games. He's not going to reach my prediction that he would finish in top 24 total points this year. However, on a points per game average basis, he will probably be in the top 24. So that's how I'm going to spin it, that I hit on that prediction. Okay, Carl Granderson continues to be a complete dud. After the fantastic start, he is falling off the edge of the earth. It's as if the earth is flat. He went to the edge, fell off, and is gone. That is Carl Granderson. 68% of the snaps, only 1 assisted tackle. If you haven't dropped him yet, feel free to do so. Cam Jordan only played 41% of the snaps, had 2 tackles and a sack. Did I mention feel free to drop Carl Granderson? I mentioned it in the previous weeks, but I'm saying it again. Demario Davis, 100% of the snaps, 11 tackles to lead the team. At 36 years old, continues to be amazing what that gentleman is doing. Pete Werner, once again, 59% of snaps. When I say once again, a very low snap count. In fact, he hasn't played more than 60% of the snaps in any of the last 6 games. He went from approximately 88% down to, I believe it was 59%. This week, again, 59%. Everything else has been even lower than those 2 59% weeks. 2 tackles and 1 pass defense. The one saving grace is he playing primarily on rushing downs, which gives him at least a little bit of a chance to get tackles if you're desperate in playing him, but I hope you're not playing him. Danny Stutzman was up to 23% of the snaps. All of those were on first and second downs only for Danny Stutzman. Isaiah Stallbird only played 11% of the snaps. He had an incredible stat line with 5 tackles and a sack. But there's a little bit of that came from special teams. The sack was incredible. He kind of leaped and flew through the air, kind of went over Kirk Cousins, missed him when Cousins ducked, but he came back and still chased him down and sacked him. So that was a beautiful play. As a side note, it was fun to watch. But you can't play Isaiah Stallbird based on 11% of snaps. Now, he is someone I've called out that I said by the end of the year, I wouldn't be surprised to see him potentially starting, but I still think that's going to be very, very late in the year, in the last game or two. In deep leagues, dynasty leagues, maybe you stash him, but redraft, don't grab him and put him in your lineup after you see these stats, folks. Don't do it, okay? Giannis Sanker played 51% of snaps deep. Justin Reed only played 30% of snaps deep. Justin Reed continues to improve, had a really nice IDP stat game. He had a 5.4 blitz rate as well. Now, the question is, was that an outlier due to Kirk Cousins? An outlier being how little deep he played and his blitz rate, and Cousins is kind of a statue at this point in time. I watched the scramble of Cousins late near the end of the first half trying to get out of bounds. Let's just say at my age, and let's just say I have a 6 as the first digit of my age, I think I could have outrun Kirk Cousins right now. Okay, but Justin Reed is someone, if you're unhappy with your safeties right now, someone that you can consider picking up and playing right now. I'd take a chance on him. Alontae Taylor played 100% of the snaps, and he only played 30% wide, which is fantastic. He had 6 tackles, and he had a 7.1% blitz rate, folks. That is my Saints, our Saints, your Saints to know as well. Let's move to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers only played 56 snaps against the Rams, and this was a blowout game. So you have a low snap count for the team, and it was a blowout, which means certain players didn't play their typical snap count, like a Lavonte David. That's not going to be good news for IDP stats, as we talked about before. Hassan Reddick was out with injury. Anthony Nelson left the game for a little while with an injury. He only played 66% of the snaps, as did Yaya Diaby with 66% of the snaps. Yaya Diaby actually got a sack. There was no way I was expecting a sack based on the way Stafford was playing, the way the Rams offensive line was playing, the way Stafford was getting the ball out, etc. But lo and behold, he pulls one off when I wasn't expecting it. Now, both of them had been playing in the 80+% range, both being Nelson and Diaby in this blowout game back down to the high 60s or mid 60s. Vita Vea was at 71% versus his typical 79%. And once again, this was on a very low snap count of 56 snaps. Elijah Roberts, who had jumped to the number 2 defensive tackle in terms of snap percentages for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, fell back down to number 3. Logan Hall leapfrogged him back to number 2. Servacio Dennis did play 100% of the snaps and had 7 tackles. Levante David only played 91% of the snaps. He did have 8 tackles to tie for the team lead. What was interesting, though, is when he came out of the game, it was John Bullock, an UDFA, not Deion Jones, who finished in mop-up. If one of the two are hurt, the two being Dennis or David, I'm still betting it's Deion Jones that plays, not John Bullock. And I think just because of the nature of the blowout and they wanted to give Bullock some snaps because this might be the only time he has a chance to get snaps, I don't know. And they wanted to preserve Deion Jones as well. I think that's what happened. Ricky's speculation. That was Ricky's speculation. Tyke Smith, 100% of the snaps, only played 34% deep. And Antoine Winfield, 68% deep on his 100% of the snaps. So Winfield played a lot more deep, but there he is leading the team tied for the team lead in tackles with 8, along with Levante David. Now, the Rams offense was just cooking, destroying the Bucs up front. Passing game was fantastic, creating lots of opportunities for Winfield as he was playing deep. Jacob Parrish played 100% of the snaps at cornerback as both Jamel Dean and Benjamin Morris were inactive with injuries. When they needed to move to 3 wide, Parrish became the slot cornerback and 57% of his snaps were in the slot. And Kendall Vildar came and played the 3rd cornerback role on the outside. Of course, this kind of tells you why the Rams destroyed the Bucs from a passing perspective. If you have to play Kendall Vildar as one of your cornerbacks. Parrish finished with 6 tackles. In a perfect world, it'd be great if Parrish was one of these types of cornerbacks who was one of the 2 starting cornerbacks and moved to the slot when other teams go to 3 wide, the offense that they're playing against. This is going to be an outlier. Dean and Morrison will be back at some point. They'll be playing opposite Zion McCullum. So this is a one-off of Jacob Parrish. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at cornerbacks. Let us move to the NFC West, folks, and let us move to the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals played only 62 snaps on defense versus the Jags in an overtime game. Baron Browning was out. B.J. Ojulari was activated from injured reserve. He's just someone to keep an eye on. I know some people say, no, Ricky, is because he went to LSU. That's a little bit of it, but he has had pretty effective pass rush win rates when he has been not injured. The problem is he has been injured a lot. The Cardinals need some additional pass rush along with Josh Sweat, as Zaven Collins, Browning, Jordan Birch. They haven't been doing enough. So we'll see what happens here with B.J. Ojulari. Of course, Mac Wilson's on IR. Cody Simon continued to wear the green dye, played 100% of the snaps. He got the line that we expected. That was about 7 tackles. Week before, he had 12 tackles. Really felt that was an outlier. With about 65 snaps kind of thing. That's where we expect Cody Simon, 7 to 8 tackles, okay? Akeem Davis-Gathered played 74% of the snaps, 7 tackles, and he had a pretty interception, by the way. The chance you're taking is he's going to play mid-70s% of the snaps, and you're risking getting a 4-tackle game just as likely as a 7-tackle game with ADG, Akeem Davis-Gathered. Walter Nolan had a beautiful defensive tackle, but he left with an injury shortly thereafter after playing only 10% of the snaps. The talent is there, but once again, injuries are derailing him. Same thing with Darius Robinson. Maybe the Cardinals need to look at something different for their defensive linemen in terms of, strength and conditioning, or maybe it's just these two younger guys because we're not having problems with Calais Campbell or Dalvin Tomlinson, for example. But disappointing that Nolan is out hurt again. At the safety position, Buda Baker and Jalen Thompson both played 100% of the snaps, both had 9 tackles, which both tied for the team lead, both had a sack. Thompson had a forced fumble on his sack that flew into the hands of Walter Nolan that created that touchdown. And Buda Baker added a very nice interception as well. So great game from both of those two on only 62 snaps. Dadrian Taylor-Dimmerson was inactive again due to injury. Will Johnson, the cornerback, was also inactive and injured. Denzel Burke and Garrett Williams were the two 100% cornerbacks. Garrett Williams did move to the slot in 3 wides. He played 42% of his snaps in the slot. Had a disappointing tackle line, even though he did get a beautiful interception that he took away from Jacoby Myers in the end zone. That is your Arizona Cardinals story. Let us move on to the Los Angeles Rams, who played 70 snaps versus the Bucs. Now, this was a blowout game, so certain positions did play their normal amounts and others didn't. Jared Verse and Byron Young, both in the low 70s, which is pretty normal for them in terms of snap count percent. Young did have 2 tackles. He had a sack that was wiped out by a penalty in the secondary. And as a result of that being wiped out, that's 4 games in a row with no sack for Byron Young. But he did have a sack. That's why I watched the game, to let you guys know that. Jared Verse had 4 tackles. He broke his 3-game sackless streak with having 2 sacks in this game. So good news for Verse. Verse continues to have great PFF, pass rush scores and win rates and pressures and so forth. Nice that he's translated those into sacks. Hopefully Young can break his sackless streak next week. Try and say that fast 3 times. I'm certainly not going to. Omar Speights only played 56% of the snaps and only had 2 assisted tackles. These number 2 linebackers, as I just talked about with ADG, when they're playing anywhere from 55 to 75% of the snaps, that is the risk you take. Speights, 56% on 70 snaps, by the way, 70 team snaps, and only had 2 assisted tackles. Nate Lemon played 81% only because of the blowout. He had 7 tackles on that 81%. A little bit down, but with the blowout, he didn't play the number of snaps we need. At the safety position, Cam Curl still played 96% of the snaps, had 8 tackles to lead the team, played 69% of the snaps deep. He comes up like a pit bull maybe is a good analogy. When he realizes it's a run, man, that guy just comes downhill. Cam Kinchins continues to play really well in his 93% of the snaps. He is up in snap count with Quentin Lake being out. He had 7 tackles. He played 71% deep. Very good game. As I just alluded to, Quentin Lake did go on IR. Roger McCreary played 1 snap. It was in the slot. He was injured. He left the game, did not return. Josh Wallace played 89% of the snaps, 94% of those in the slot. The bad news is he only had 2 tackles and 1 pass defense. And once again, that was 89% of 70 snaps that he played. So basically around 62, 63 snaps, which is almost a full game. So Josh Wallace, with McCreary being injured, looks like he will step into that role. Now, if McCreary is back, I don't know if I'm trusting McCreary or Wallace because it could be some sort of platoon as well. As Jalen McCullough also played 47% of the snaps and he played 55% in the slot, he actually had 4 tackles in the pass defense. So he was much more productive than Wallace on fewer snaps. So until this kind of clears a little bit, I'm not playing any of those guys. I don't even know if I'm roster stashing any of those guys. And Quentin Lake might not be back until week 18 or in the playoffs with that elbow injury he had that led him to be on IR. That is the Rams situation. We're going to move on to the San Francisco 49ers, who, it wasn't exactly the most robust game and against the Panthers on Monday night. The 49ers only played 46 snaps against the Panthers. As we were talking about throughout the show, that's the equivalent of about 3/4 of a game on defense of an average game. You're not going to put up a lot of stats when that happens. So Curtis Robinson finished with a lousy 3 tackles, and those weren't all solo tackles. Let me tell you, playing 100% of those 46 snaps. That is a bad stat line, even on 46 snaps. Watching the game, saw some missed tackles where he got juked, saw a bad angle, saw a miss tackle. It was not pretty for Curtis Robinson. Now, I am leery on playing him based on what I saw. I was okay playing Tatum Bethune, and I did pick up Curtis Robinson in a league, one of my favorite leagues, but I'm going to look for an alternative based on what I saw, to be honest with you. Now, I could be wrong, and he'll come back and do very well as he did late in the previous game when he went in for Tatum Bethune. I'm just not trusting it based on what I saw. D. Winters played 100% of the snaps. He only had one freaking tackle. Nick Martin did not play any snaps on defense. So he did get a good tackle on special teams. Bryce Huff played 76% of the snaps. Sam O, who I don't even try and pronounce his last name, played 33% of the snaps, but he was injured and did not return to the game. They said he was questionable return, but he didn't have his helmet and he had an earpiece on listening to the defensive play calls and stuff. So he wasn't coming back into the game. Keon White played 63%. Cleveland Farrell did have a sack, only played 46% of the snaps. Don't chase him if he happens to bump up higher because you have a big play scoring system that bumps him up to your higher on your free agent list of defensive ends. And he played so much because Robert Beal was inactive due to a concussion. If Beal's back and Sam O is able to play, Farrell might not even be on the active 47 this coming week. Jair Brown had a fantastic game with 5 tackles and 2 big play interceptions for us. He played 52% of the snaps deep, so he didn't play much deep at all. That's after 53, 31, and 56. So he's getting some really good utilization close to the line of scrimmage that we like. We can play some Jair Brown. Now, I almost panicked when they were going through the starters and they go Jair Brown and Jason Pinnock were the 2 starters at safety. And I was really panicked when I saw him flash that on the Monday Night Football game. But I quickly saw that number 6, Malik Mustafa, was in the game and started. And he had a fantastic game. On those 46 snaps, he only had 7 tackles. Similar to what I said about Cam Curl, he was like a heat-seeking missile coming downhill towards the line of scrimmage, and he only played 39% of the snaps deep. Great game from Malik Mustafa. Now, the previous week he did play 71%, and the weeks before that it was 50 and 42%. So I think that 71% may be an outlier, and Malik Mustafa is someone we're going to like his alignment along with Jair Brown. By the way, if you watch the Kyle Shanahan in the locker room that they showed post-game, he called out Jair Brown. He had a nickname for him. I didn't quite catch what that name was, but it was Jair Brown. So Jair Brown's not going anywhere out of that starting lineup. Upton Stout continues to be the slot corner. Only played 58% of the snaps of 46 snaps. It's not a whole lot, but he did have 6 tackles, and he blitzed 11.1% of the time. That's a significant number. Now, it was the Panthers. It was Bryce Young. That could be a one-off. The thing about the 49ers, if you play in a Brown or Mustafa, or you have to play a Robinson, or you're playing Winters, they are on bye in week 14. So have alternatives. And we talked about this a little bit last week too, but if you have like Christian McCaffrey, Juwan Jennings, George Kittle, make sure you're planning ahead for week 14. Try and do that now as we're going to week 13. Try and get ahead of things. Okay. That is your 49ers. Let us move to the Seattle Seahawks, folks. And the Seattle Seahawks played 75 snaps versus the Tennessee Titans. I have to admit, I did not see this coming in terms of the Seahawks having to play that many snaps against the Titans. And I alluded to that when I talked about Tennessee earlier. Ernest Jones, after missing a game with a knee problem, came back and played the next week, was out again this week with the knee. So with that, Drake Thomas moved into the Ernest Jones role. Last week, as the number 2 linebacker, Drake Thomas gave us 1 lousy tackle, and I believe that's what I called it last week, a lousy tackle. This week, he led the team with 10 tackles in that Ernest Jones role. No word yet on if Ernest Jones will be back, but Drake Thomas is playable if Ernest Jones is out. Tyrese Knight suffered a concussion, so he was also unavailable. That means the stud, the stallion, the star, Patrick O'Connell, play the number 2 linebacker role. Okay, that was sarcasm if you didn't pick up on that, folks, in terms of his capabilities. He only played 55% of snaps, but he did get 9 tackles and a sack. And once again, that was on 75 team snaps. Okay? But we're not playing Patrick O'Connell. We're not taking that chance if Jones and Knight are both out once again. He will be on your waiver wire. He will show up very high. Don't chase it, folks, unless you're desperate for 1 week and we find out that Jones and Knight are both not playing. I'm assuming at least one of them will be back this coming week. Nicky Monwari played over 90% of the snaps again at 97%. 90+%, so over 90% were in the slot / box. He also blitzed 8.2% of the time, and he finished with eight tackles. He is a top 15 safety and probably a top 12, and maybe even higher if he continues to play like this kind of snap count with this kind of utilization in this Seahawks defense. Love me some Iman Wari. I'm playing him just about every week. Okay? Devin Witherspoon played 95% of the snaps. The one piece of good news, he only played 55% outside after 66 and 69% the previous 2 weeks. But he only blitzed 2.8% of the time versus the 8.2 that Iman Wari blitzed. Okay? When there were 3 cornerbacks in the game, Josh Jobe and Tariq Woolen were on the outside. Witherspoon was on the inside. Iman Wari, I should have mentioned it, also played sort of a quasi-linebacker role as well, and that's part of the reason O'Connell was only in the 55% range as opposed to maybe the high 70s or 80% range that the number 2 linebacker typically plays for Seattle. So good news on Witherspoon. We'll see if that continues. Still a little bit leery of playing him, but at least that was a trend in the right direction, or a start of a trend in the right direction versus the previous 2 weeks. Ty Okada played 35% of the snaps before leaving with an injury. In his absence, DeAnthony Bell is the person that stepped in. Reminder, Julian Love is expected back soon, potentially here as early as week 13. So if you don't have an IR slot, you could probably drop Okada, particularly if there's word that Love begins his 21-day practice window. Byron Murphy, a defensive tackle, continues to be a stud and is a top 12 defensive tackle right now. Second-year rookie, first-rounder out of the University of Texas, had 5 tackles and a sack. Boy, if you can get him in Dynasty and defensive tackle required, do it before he blows up even more. Leonard Williams plays 80% of the snaps. He also had a sack to go along with 4 tackles, but he also had 4 big quarterback hits. So a big game for Leonard Williams. At the edge position, DeMarcus Lawrence played 69%, down from 78% the previous week. Nwosu is on par with his 59% the previous week. Derek Hall, who was coming back from injury last week, played 37% of the snaps last week, was up to 53% this week. So basically, Lawrence came down, Hall went up. Boy Mafe went down from 40% to 33%. So that now feels just about what we can expect from the edges for Seattle as we move forward. I know last week I kind of said similar, but I think Lawrence coming down, Hall being up, and Mafe being down a little bit more, that's how I expect the edges to continue for the rest of the season. All righty, that concludes the Seattle Seahawks, folks. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, for those that missed, unfortunately, because of my travels to LSU and trying to watch as much of the games and all the games as I could and doing the stats and analysis and looking up for unique stuff in PFF to share with you all, I didn't get a chance to do the waiver wire list. But if you listen to the show, or if you're curious about certain players, you can go in, because I will have the timestamps, you can go and listen to those specific teams and you can hear my call outs about those specific players. Okay. So reminder, we have our Start Sit show. Shawn will be there on Sunday to join me, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central, for about 1 hour. Get your questions in early. Don't wait till the last 5 minutes to get your questions in. If you like this show, please give it a thumbs up, folks. It's really appreciated on YouTube because it also helps the recommendations from YouTube. So it makes more and more people aware of our show. Okay. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet. If you have comments, suggestions, questions, as I talked about at the beginning of the show, please put them on the YouTube channel, and Shawn and I will try and respond to all of them. Give me a follow at RickyRod66 or Shawn at 8386. We'll have our start sit show this coming Sunday morning, as I just said. We'll be back next week to talk about week 13. And on behalf of Shawn Teague, this is Ricky Roderick wishing you, your family, and your friends great health and happiness. Wishing you a wonderful Thanksgiving and safe travels if you all are traveling. Be kind to one another. And we're out of here, and we will catch you next time.